Hi there everybody, my name is Kate and welcome to my channel, Trinergy Awakens Naturally. So I was recently talking to a friend of mine and we got into the discussion of divine masculine and divine feminine, which I love those conversations. I mean, they're very mind expanding, mind blowing, nauseating. There are a lot of stuff aggravating. There's so many stereotypes that humans like to identify things that we can put into boxes to understand. We as an organizational system, we like to think of things in such a way so that we know what box it belongs into, where do I put it, where do I place it, where is its priority, etc., etc., etc. It's a way of thinking that allows us to organize the information that we're getting, and there's nothing wrong with it, except that very rarely is one person going to be able to be narrowed down into one or two or three different boxes. And the less boxes we have for our ideas of people, places, things, systems, etc. Excuse me, I've got a stray cat here that just wants to linger for a minute. The less boxes we have, the more narrow our view is going to be of whatever it is. And the truth in reality is that nothing is so flat and unnuanced that it doesn't have, a trillion different boxes of understanding that it could have, or slices. So I like to get very broad brush in understanding things to help me get, okay, if we're going to say divine masculine and divine feminine, okay, male, female, even there you're going to run into a whole lot of discussion. So this person, how do you want to apply it to this person? And so anyway, already starting into some kind of treacherous territory with, I wonder what this is going to mean, masculine, feminine, and male-female relationship, and, all of this, and how it pertains to the age of Aquarius, etc. So I'm just kind of hanging back in the conversation and waiting, because there's no sense in me already taking a stance on something if I don't already know what the hell the topic really is. And if we're on a topic that's going to need to be about 3 layers in before I can even really understand what part of this do you want to talk about, because there's 25 floors at least. Which floor are you landing on with this particular topic? So she was just saying that, well, women should be a certain way and men should be a certain way in a relationship. Well, I'm not a huge fan of the word should, because it's just one that doesn't serve very well. It really doesn't. It shouldn't be in the vocabulary. It's just one that should has a whole lot of assumption when I'm saying it or another person is saying it, that is the authority. It should be done like this. Well, what is the authority that gives license to say what something should be? And so I'm careful in using that word. And I started asking her, what does that mean to you? What do you mean by there should be designated somethings in a relationship, or why is it related to gender? And what it came down to, in a whole lot of teasing out some cloud and some confusion, was I was not trying to be oppositional with her. I was trying to understand what part of this are we talking about, because there's a whole lot of subterfuge in saying the shoulds, and well, women just blah blah blah, men just blah, blah, blah. These are broad categories, and you're narrowing it down to a very specific relationship. So we can move those, narrowed down topics. If you're talking about very specific situations, then let's talk about the nuances of those specific situations. Otherwise, we're just smashing around the same broad topic and getting nowhere about your actual problem. And that just ends up being, round and around and around kind of turntable discussions of the same garbage with no solution. And so it's okay that people want to do that or need time to, sometimes we just need to process. However, this is something that's come up a number of times. And so I figure, okay, she's wanting to talk about this, then we need to spin this a different direction. And, what part of this can we talk about that might actually get to the meat of what's bothering you about this, right? And so what ended up happening is there's expectations, because we're spiritual people, we're enlightened people, we know stuff, we're energy healers, we're energy workers. And, the age of Aquarius is about the divine feminine. And I said, well, okay, hold up for just a second right there. That what are you calling divine feminine? Are you encasing it in an actual gendered body as a woman? Are you saying that divine feminine cannot be found in a masculine man, or in a feminine man, or in a gendered man? What are you saying? Because all of those iterations would have different expressions of the same exact energy. And she kind of I said, well, what do you mean? And so we start getting into these nuances, and essentially I'm just using that confusion and that, almost delusion of what man woman is versus divine masculine and divine feminine energy is. Okay, they're not the same thing. The way I am gendered has absolutely nothing to do with the type of energy that I write in predominantly. It would be lovely to say that I'm a gendered female, and I am. I'm okay with saying that out loud, that I am a gendered woman, and I happen to be more comfortable with my divine feminine energy, or my feminine energy. And because I am expressing more of my masculine energy in a balanced way, I can say that I feel overall pretty balanced in both sides of me, be they masculine or feminine. It's just that I prefer a more feminine angle to me. However, I know plenty of very healthy people that ride as masculine energy. However, they're gendered in a female body, or trans bodies, or whatever they are. I know people that, they are not expressing their energetic expression, their energetic stamp is not necessarily aligned with what nature gave them, in their anatomy, which I don't have a problem with that, because that's just a matter of how we are naturally inclined. There are some men that are far more comforting and far more the person that I would want to offer me help, assistance, and care if I were sick than some of the women I've known in my life. So, just because somebody has breasts and, ovaries and stuff doesn't mean that they necessarily are going to be mothering and caretaking and nurturing by their instinct. They may or may not. And just because someone has, phallic material in their pants does not mean that that's going to ultimately be the stronger, more courageous, more honorable, protective, etc. father figure. They may or may not be. It has a lot to do with what our history is, how we're allowed to identify ourselves as a child. If we had any confusion about that, if we were mashed and managed to be squishing a soft side or hardening up into something that, was easy for us to do, if we were only allowed to express one side of us that was safest, then we're going to be kind of already misshapen and mismatched with ourselves, kind of. And in society over the years, in the age of Pisces, there's a lot of us that were squished in what our sensitive side is. Doesn't mean that men are not sensitive, or that divine masculine cannot be sensitive. However, that trait of it being more feminine seemed to be, that they were sissies, that we were just being wusses, etc. Whether we were female or not, I heard that a lot. You're sissy, But if a dude was doing it, that was like a cardinal sin. That you're just being a wimp. You're being, like one of the girls, and that was considered the ultimate. Oh my God, no, I can't do that. Girls. Only girls cry, or boys don't do this, don't be soft, etc. And so we are geared at the age of Aquarius as we're coming into that. That's why you see divine feminine and the need for that to be coming in as the heavier presence that it is, or the more predominant presence that it is, and showing all of us, whether we're masculine, feminine, no matter what our anatomy is, no matter who we're synced up and linked up with, no matter who we're married to, no matter who we were raised by, no matter what we're doing in our lives, it's divine feminine, and that role as divine feminine within each one of us that will help to bring that comfort, that compassion, that kindness, that soothing, etc. to us, to our hearts, and also bring that Queen of Swords type energy of the sharp, the truth, the real, the raw, is that if I'm going to truly be divine feminine, who is very nurturing and kind and all of those beautiful things, I'm also going to say that, snap it up, let's go, we've got to get up, buttercup. If I'm helping someone that's sick, if I'm there and I'm caretaking and I'm tending and I'm moving them through their illness, like, my child or something, then I'm going to help them and really soothe and comfort and be that mothering presence, right up to the point that I'm enabling them to stay in bed and, not get up and move on with their life. If I'm going to be a true divine feminine that's balanced and is ready to speak the truth, then I comfort them through the time when they're the most vulnerable, when they can really use a hand, when it's helpful to have that compassion and that kindness and that soothing. When we don't feel well, it's a perfect time to have a mom type come in, that energy, no matter what it's embodied in, to have that energy coming in to be very soothing. And when it's time to, okay, it's over now, it's time to get back into our strength, our role as whatever it was that we were doing before we became incapacitated or vulnerable. And unfortunately, unfortunately, because all of these spaces have been twisted up and mashed and mushed and really distorted through a lot of abusive behavior and mismanagement and mistreatment of one another, a lot of people don't know what a woman is about, a man is about, or anything in between, any expression in between, because we think that we've already got it locked in. If I have breasts, I must be a good mom automatically. I must be a good woman. I must know how to do femininity well. I must already instinctively understand what it is to be soft and kind and gentle. And let me tell you, some of the most brutal players I have ever seen in the field of life have been the women that were surrounding me. They would eat you alive, and the men were standing around going, yeah, I'm not sure about this, yeah, don't stand still for too long because you're fixing to be, never mind, we're going to need another Timmy. It was awful. So, and I'm not meaning to smash on the women. I'm just saying that we have a lot of distortion in what femininity is. And we have a lot of, masculines, men, actual gendered men or masculine identifying men that don't know where they stand. They don't know how to be that strong presence, because we've got women that are riding in their masculine energy that are being very dominant, alpha, and scary, in my opinion. And so whenever I was talking to my friend and trying to understand 1111, what is it that you're trying to accomplish in your mind? What goal are you trying to accomplish in your mind? Or what problem or puzzle are you trying to solve in your mind of understanding this dynamic between this person and you, and that relationship, and what you were working to attain and that didn't happen? What was that? And what ended up happening was that it was really an imbalance in both of them, which is kind of what it is for most people. We're struggling to find out our own balance. And if we're hooked up with somebody else who's equally as, in the closet, not technically perhaps, but in the dark about their own balance, if they don't know how to do that and we don't know how to do that, we're bringing our broken and raw parts to one another and just dancing in that dysfunction and codependency and toxicity quite a lot. That's the nature of the dysfunction that we live in and are pulling out of from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. And so there's no stank on that. It's just a lot of us were bumbling around in the dark until we wake up to, oh my gosh, yeah, there's a whole different way, and it doesn't involve stereotyping people or narrowing down to boxes of, well, a man should be this. And so as I was talking to my friend and we narrowed it down, really what the truth was is that she had a lot of pain and a lot of hurt associated with her very masculine, dominant, mean as hell mom, who was extremely abusive, who was extremely toxic, very Black Widow, and very unkind to her father. So she's watching the protector of the family be absolutely emasculated. She's been abused by a man and a woman outside of her family structure, which also confused things. And then everything's pretending like this is normal. Most of us have some sort of a backstory. Those of us that have been through it really weirdly, we have quite a few of us backstories that include that distortion of the male-female roles, first of all, and the masculine-feminine roles. Because in my personal family, as I related to her, that perhaps one of the puzzles to solve is not to try to solve the puzzle of how this is interacting with somebody out here. It's to how am I interacting with me in here. That for me, one of the biggest things I had the most trouble with when I pulled away from my whole life and started looking at it and going, what is this? What kind of a woman am I? What kind of women did I come from? What kind of men did I come from? What's the inventory of me? How do I feel about being a woman? How do I feel about, the men that were in my world, the women that were in my world, and how do I feel about the way that I relate to all of that? And that was really quite an introspective journey, because excuse me, timer. It was all breaking apart for me with a divorce. And so I was forced to really kind of look at myself and say, what kind of a wife was I? What kind of a mother was I? What kind of a woman am I? And what kind am I willing to be? And what was I watching? And what I found was that as a woman, what I had watched was a lot of men be very weak and emasculated in my world, that they really had no power. They were angry. They acted out and they did horrible stuff, and they were allowed to do so because it kept the heat off other places that didn't need the focus. You know what I'm saying? Like, put that on the least of the ones that can defend themselves, and so squirt that another direction besides at the adult level. But it was really the man was made the villain. The man was made the one that was awful. The man that was made the one that had really no power because his, junk was in her purse. and yet he's the one that was acting out and could be targeted almost as, the scapegoat in the adult world. And yet the children were the one who suffered. And I saw that through several generations on both sides, where the man had very little power. However, he had authority over, the money sometimes, not in every one of those scenarios that I looked, but the man had power over the money, or he was allowed to distort the usage of the money, which is a way of distorting the power and redistributing it. So there was a lot of places where man was supposed to be the head of the household, and yet really wasn't holding that title except through violence alone. And the violence was mostly reactionary to the abuse that he was sustaining. And they often, at least in those scenarios in my own personal history and the ones that I looked at surrounding me and what I grew up seeing, was that those men, a lot of them had addiction issues, huge. They had huge addiction. I don't want to be here. I'm running away. I'm drinking. I'm sexing. I'm drugging. I'm doing something because I don't want to be here, but I am here. So, and when they weren't doing that, they were either shut down emotionally completely and or they were violent. So these are typical patterns that they play out in, the people's lives that are executing these behavior patterns and keeping the generational junk going. They look pretty much the same in the patterning. However, they'll story out in, a bazillion different directions, as many people on the planet have that story. Then it shows in their particular details of the story. However, the patterns are very archetypal, they're very predictable, and they're very understandable from that viewpoint. Now, what do you do with that? What I had to do with that was to look at, where did I learn how to be the emasculating woman? Where did I learn how to be the soft and kind and gentle, soothing mother that I want to be? And I found out then that, yeah, that's kind of an instinctive thing. And if a man or a woman doesn't know how to do that, or whomever, a person does not know how to instinctively do that, that's going to be hard to kind of teach someone. So in my particular family, the women were not the soothers. The men weren't either. However, the women, that will tell your mom about her, tell your grandma, or tell your auntie, or tell whomever, tell the female teacher. I found that I actually bonded with the male teachers better at school because they were the kindest, they were the softest spoken, they were the ones who were, very gentle in their approach with me, because I oftentimes didn't understand stuff, and screaming, that just, caused me to tune right out. And so they picked up on the sensitive needs of, hey, let's use a gentle tone of voice. And then by the time, I got to high school, I actually had a male teacher that he was very kind and he was very gentle in much of his approach. However, when he got divine feminine and like Queen of Swords action, he was pretty much right there with it of, no, my standard is this, that I understand when you're having a rough day, and I understand, etc. Give me the whole story. However, I really don't need to hear the whole story, and I really am not going to tolerate the whole story. I'm going to get, enough to know that you're having a bad day. However, it still doesn't preclude the needs of my class. If you need to step out, then step out the whole way. However, step back in the whole way, one or the other, but you may not stay in here being sloppy, because I have a standard. And it actually helped me to shape up into being more understanding of myself as a teenager at the time. And now in retrospect, I think, thank God that man showed up in my life at a crucial time when he did, to help me understand what I could expect from a trustworthy man and a trustworthy person in general, what that behavior looked like. That I didn't hate him. He was one of the hardest teachers I ever had, and it was with my music. So he was my first voice teacher, and I spent 3 years with that, learning and training hard, and the expectations were very high. I ultimately got my degree in music because of him, as a voice student. So because he showed me what that was, to help empower other people, that it had nothing to do with having low bar or low ball expectations. It also didn't have anything to do with having unreasonable, ridiculous expectations. And there was a fine balance between how much he would tolerate of my personal life being dragged in and causing me to be dramatic and over the top within his presence. He had an expectation, and even though there were times I was very angry at him and thought, you're asking too much, I also knew that this wasn't like some of my other teachers that could have cared less. They could have cared less if my life was falling apart. Behind the scenes, they didn't care. I have my expectation, and here it is, and whatever your sad sack story is, whatever your world is, blah, blah, blah. It was the same problem happening across all of my classes. However, there was zero consideration except their bottom line, whereas him, he had consideration for his bottom line, and yet he had a very noble way that a man/woman, a person that was well balanced in how they were dealing with me as their student, he had a very good way of being able to execute the side of it that understood, look, I get it. I do understand, you know, that there's some things going on and that this is really tough for you. However, can you put that aside? And we had a couple of, you know, rows where I thought, what a jerk, you know, I can't stand this. And some of that was really more about the hard knocks of being 14, 15, 16 years old and understanding that, yeah, suck it up, buttercup. This isn't that. It isn't that. You know, this isn't a bad day. This is you being kind of entitled and a princess. You know, you can get over that now. And that kind of hurt my feelings. However, I still deep in me knew that he was speaking the truth to me. He had already demonstrated to me that he cared more about me as my person. And that if at any point, any day of my life when I'd gone in there and said, look, you know, I really need to talk to you, he was a safe haven for me to do that. And I never did ever really talk to him about anything that was really consequential about my life. However, knowing that we came very close and that he saw me and just intuitively knew, yeah, bitch, we going through it, you know, that he pushed me right to the edge of performing very well so that I could reach that state of, I feel good about myself, that despite the fact the rest of my world is a piece of garbage right at the moment that I've come in here, he's validated this precious part of me that he identifies, he respects, and he loves in me, and he's helping to train me, and he's not going to let me show up sloppy. He's also not going to expect me to show up in my peak performance on a day when I'm having trouble, you know, getting out of bed and dealing with my life. So there's a delicate skill and a delicate balance in being able to do those things, but it really has to do with the execution of that through the balance of how much masculine, how much feminine, how much of the right brain, left brain, you can put it however way you want to, how much balance are we bringing when we're bringing the thunder? Are we also bringing a little bit of rain to soothe that out? Are we gonna, you know, only sizzle people, or are we gonna help to bring in some chill? And when we've locked people down into, you know, like my one set of teachers, that they were real into their academia, they did not care. Whatever, we've got her down to the box of student, and all my students, I expect X, Y, Z. And pretty much, I would say 99% of the students pretty much felt that way about the teacher, is you are a jerk. You know, that's we didn't have any other view of an adult except that view of you as the teacher. You kind of mean. And so we had each other in those mutual places. However, only one of us was an adult in that situation. So when we get mature enough and old enough, and age is rarely the definer of that, when we get to that place when we can step aside, pull out and look at things and start seeing where's the humanity in this, that's when we can really start bringing forth a better balance of what it is to be a mothering presence or a fathering presence. And if we didn't have a really good example of that, man, that can take a little bit of time to really decide what that is, because I'm nothing like the female people in my family. I am absolutely nothing like any of them and never have been. And I'm proud to say that. However, if I had to rely on anything that I learned, then I would have been SOL. I had to rely on the fact that I know how I feel, how I know I want to feel whenever I'm not feeling well, or when I, you know, have been treated well by teachers and by my voice teacher, that, you know, he wasn't warm and squishy. He didn't give me hugs. He didn't peck me on the cheek. He didn't do any of that. However, his words said very comforting things to me. They told me things without having to be all touchy-feely. If I was going to need touchy-feely, I was going to have to get that, you know, from one of my voice coaches that was a woman, and she did that. However, she also didn't have as good a standard for me as he did, and so I was lucky just that those people happened to be two separate people that I was able to get that from. However, if I was going to have to be left with, you know, not having those people, I would have had a hard time understanding what the role of divine feminine or divine masculine, either one, would be, how I would act as a woman, how I would, you know, tolerate behavior out of a man or a woman, how I would tolerate anybody's behavior, how I would expect anyone to tolerate mine. There's a lot of confusion based on those very narrow boxes of, yeah, mom, dad, or, you know, child, or whatever it is, that it's not enough. So when I'm hearing people in conversation and they want to begin the conversation like, well, men and women, you know, men should, like, wow, we've just gone nuclear and we aren't even into this conversation, not even 30 seconds, and it's already going off the rails. And it was not an unpleasant conversation. It's just, to me, it's thought-provoking that, you know, I want to know why. If things have blown up in my world, I'm going to be doing the after action review and assuming that if I was there, I had some part of that, whether or not I was taken advantage of and, given a bunch of lies and told a bunch of crap and, taken advantage of, or it doesn't matter. If I was there, then I was involved in it. Then at a minimum, I need to know, why was I there believing a bunch of lies and bullshit? And what was I doing? What was in my thought process? Where's the after action review need to pick up of how not to ever do that again? How do I learn from that? And that's a very bumpy and tentative process for most of us, because most of that wounding comes from our parents. And most people that I know that are really, struggling in very harsh behaviors, man or woman, however they're gendered, there's a great imbalance. And when I see it, they usually have a story that's related to at least one parent that was really, really not all that great, and the other that was super passive, or they were given the title of the monster in the family. And yet, if you look, in a lot of those places, the monster was being poked from elsewhere, and that person that was poking was the one who often was sitting back going, oh, isn't that sad? Poke, poke, poke. It's a dynamic that it's going away, thank goodness. However, it's not going to go by turning a blind eye on it any longer. It certainly won't go away by men or women or anybody else, any gender identification, any sexual orientation, doesn't matter. Any person not taking personal responsibility and sovereignty of their whole package of energy. Because I'm not just a woman. I am gendered as a woman. However, I have masculine and feminine all in me. And if I'm imbalanced in one or the other, I'm going to be running people over, or I'm going to allow myself to be run over, one or the other, depending on how I go with that. And it's not necessarily to ride exclusively in masculine means I'm going to be a domineering, butthole, nor does it mean that if I'm riding exclusively in feminine energy that I'm going to be this loving, forgiving Jesus type. The balance would allow me to know that I love and I give generously and freely, and that I'm soothing and comforting, and I will also put my foot right in it if I need to let you know some things that that's not a good way to do that. It's the matter of not bringing all the anger, resentment, and the imbalance into how I'm going to step forward with people. And so the first thing for me personally is that in those after action reviews, get out of those boxes where I want to just put people, he's a or she's a cool. Now that we've identified, let's hop in that little Russian thing doll and pull the top off that and find out what's the next layer, because there's always layers. There is no human, no matter how shallow they are, no matter how flat Stanley they are, it doesn't matter. There's always layers. You can always find layers. And it may be that the people themselves will not give us those layers, and that's fine. They don't have to. However, I can dig deep into the layers of me to understand what layer of me was dealing with that flat Stanley weird stuff that caused me to believe some things. So anyway, I hope that's helpful to you in some way, and I hope that you enjoy your day no matter what part of the day you're in. And remember to get within your skin, because you're divine, masculine or feminine, and both, all the in between, are absolutely fine. You can get in there and speak to yourself, speak to your higher self, speak to your team, your spirit, God, Jesus, Brahma, Allah, whomever it is that you surrender to or submit to, or that you talk to, Mother Nature, whomever it is. That entity, that energy, that knowing, that knowledge, that power base understands you, because it is a piece of you, and is what we're unfolding every day that can lead us in our way if we're asking for that kind of help. If we're busy out here playing in front of us laterally, then we're just robots that are matrixing and dealing with Agent Smith over and over and over again. And it's really about, let me go ahead and hop up here and see if I can work on my anti-matrix skills, so that when I drop into the world, I don't have to be mean or hateful or assess people as being just a Agent Smith. However, if what they're bringing me is Agent Smith material, I need to be able to identify that one right off the top and stop going into those nuances of explaining why they do it. It's the fact that they're doing it is far enough to get started with how quickly do I need to disengage from this, and we might be able to talk, from a distance. However, getting involved in it moves us into that combat almost immediately.